We've seen the videos of some of the attacks in Cairo's streets, and they're hard to watch. They're frenzied, they're inhuman, the mob piling in. Is this a gender-based problem, this hatred of women, this misogyny, or is this a violence problem in Egyptian society as a whole?
Egyptian women have historically always participated in public life, despite, maybe the stereotype that's been offered, in the West since the beginning of the 20th century. And in the revolution, we saw, Egyptian women at the forefront in Tahrir Square and all over the country in many positions, not just as protesters, but even as, doctors and field hospital, assistants, defending people all over. So the role of women that has come out, I think, threatens, we are, despite, undergoing this revolutionary process, which is not complete, a very patriarchal society. And it is, known, I think, if you study or research the history of revolutions similar to the Egyptian revolution, you always see that the role of women there's pushes, to have it be taken back once, everything has settled down more or less, okay, now you can go back home, you can stay where you are, that's the attitude. But the Egyptian women are different, and they will not give in to that. And I think the fact that they are a big force of the groups that go down and protest and demand for their rights. And so there is a strong sense of women empowerment amongst the circles of women. However, the society is not accepting that. And if we look at the discourse used by the Muslim Brotherhood and the regime towards women, since even from before the revolution, as the public discourse, it's always been, treating women's issues and women's problems as like, oh, we have to cover the woman's body, she can't do this, she can't do that. It's all related to the sexuality and the body. It's never related to, oh, she has to have equal pay, or she has, the issues that we as feminists are demanding. So there's a combination of feeling threatened by the role of women and trying to scare more women of joining these forces. So these tapes that you've mentioned, the organized mob sexual harassment that has become an epidemic in the last couple of months, it's really part of the plan to get different groups of people from not, participating in Tahrir and in the protest movement. That's very, alive, and it's not going to stop in Egypt.
Well, this raises the question then of if it is as much political as anything at the moment, especially when the issue of protest is still so important in Egypt. Who is trying to deter women from participating in the revolution? And I'll quote, I'm sure you know this already, I'll quote Egypt's National Council of Women to you when they said, in their view, the abuses suffered by Egyptian women from harassment and rape in Tahrir Square recently is systematic and carried out by organized groups to force women not to participate.
Who?
Do we know who?
We don't know. This is the problem, because usually these incidents that take place, it's usually in the evening, so it's dark, and you've seen it's like 150, 100 or more. It's very hard, even though everybody has now mobile smartphones and they can take pictures and videos. It's very hard to get the faces. But obviously, the Islamists, the political Islam groups do have a role in preventing women and other groups from going out and protesting against the policies that are now we have the regime represented by Morsi and by the government is a more or less an Islamist regime. So it could be these groups, it could be people who are just, thugs that are, being hired for money, somebody who wants to create a chaotic atmosphere in Egypt, because what Mubarak said when, before he stepped down, it's like, you either keep up with me or it's going to be chaos, So I don't have, I can't point a finger, but I think it's a combination of different groups. But I think the media coverage that this issue has gotten, and the public outcry and the awareness and the amount of grassroots groups that have flourished over this issue is very inspiring and very empowering, because it means that even if these incidents continue, people are not going to stop from working against them and fighting them. And that's really what the revolution is about, you know, people empowerment.
But you've got two political strands working here, if you like. One political, and the other one social political. Is this about doing things that will upset all Egyptians, i.e. the harassment, brutal harassment of women, thereby making the government look bad, making the government look like it's not in control? Or is it actually about stopping women participating because you don't like female participation? Which is it?
I think it could be like there could be groups who are doing that, yes, to make the regime look bad and to say you can't control the streets and, you know, that it's not safe anymore.
Some people claim that's what's going on. It's to say it's Mubarak's thugs again. But on the other hand,
it could be that. But the thing is, though, if we look at, you know, the discourse that has taken place in the Majlis al-Shura, which is, you know, the upper house since our parliament is disbanded now, there was a discussion on this issue. And the comments that were made are really, you know, quite disappointing, you know, saying like, oh, well, why do they go to Tahrir? Only bad people, women go to Tahrir. This kind of stuff that's just so stereotypical, you know, and also in the TV channels that are, you know, watched by millions, which have, you know, these, so I'd like to call TV evangelists or something in that, you know, regard. And they say this kind of stuff, and it's like, you know, it's brainwashing to people. I mean, even in the parliament before it was disbanded, the discussions that took place, you know, on all the personal status law, all the laws that had given women some kind of rights, you know, during the Mubarak era, you know, there was this campaign to fight these laws, claiming that these are the Suzanne Mubarak laws, you know, just because Suzanne Mubarak headed, you know, was the kind of the honorary head of the National Council of Women. But actually, the people that worked and fought for these laws, for some of them for decades, for example, the nationality law, which allowed Egyptian women married to foreigners to give their children the nationality. This is the work of grassroots groups, feminist groups, women's rights groups that had worked on it for years and years. And okay, maybe the National Council of Women pushed for it or helped, but it's a collective work. And to have it just branded by, you know, Suzanne Mubarak and taking away from what this law means and how it will affect the lives of, you know, women and their children is ridiculous, really.
Can we tackle a subject we've sort of skirted around up till now, and it's really the role of religion in all of this? I mean, we've seen the photograph famously of the woman taking her shoe and whacking a bearded, presumably Salafi man in the face with it because he called her a harlot because she didn't have her head covered. Is this also something that is going wrong in Egyptian society now, that the respect that used to be accorded between sects and also the ability to live and let custom be observed by whoever wants to, is that going and are women bearing a disproportionate amount of the brunt of it?
I think there is, you know, it's a very volatile time, and I think there's a lot of extreme reactions, and I think many of the people that are, you know, going down to the streets, especially I think the men, you know, from these groups that are, you know, more conservative, whether they belong to the political Islam or they're just conservative Egyptian men, are not used to interacting with women in the street, and that women have the space and the right to, you know, because maybe at home they don't allow, you know, the female members of their families to speak out. So they're not allowed to, you know, they're not used to interacting with women who are going to speak back and not, you know, and not shut up and not accept to be told, you know, oh, you can't stand in the front line, or you can't do this, or you can't. The next step, you know, after establishing this role of women in the street movements and stuff, which has been established, is moving on to the political parties. It bothers me as an Egyptian woman who has always been part of this, you know, the civil society in Egypt from before the revolution, that this great revolution that everybody has looked onto, when you have all these, you know, press conferences and pictures in the papers and stuff of, the leaders of so-and-so political parties meeting, and there's not a single woman in the picture.
There's no quota here.
Yeah.
Like there was in Iraq.
Yeah, but
no quota.
There doesn't need, I mean, I'm one of the people that I don't believe in the system of quota or affirmative action. I believe that women should, you know, the women who are qualified to participate, and we do have women qualified, should attain these positions just, you know, because of their qualifications, not because they are women, you know. And I think that if we use the quota system, it can come back and hurt us, because for example, in a lot of the political parties that would just have women who could sometimes, you know, I mean, it's all over the world. It's not always that women in positions of power support women's rights. You know, it could actually backfire in many cases.
Well, let's look at where you're at legally and politically now. You have a new constitution. There are international conventions on women and women's rights that Egypt presumably has ratified. So what are we actually seeing written into law now that makes you feel that in a women's rights, human rights context, women are better supported under this new government than they were before? Anything?
Well, I mean, you know, we are as a country, Egypt has, you know, we have ratified we are party to the CEDAW, you know, the Convention for the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, and we've made a couple of reservations regarding, you know, inheritance laws, because we follow the laws of the Sharia regarding inheritance, so that women and men are not equal in that regard, as opposed to the Shiite practice, and I think that's followed in Iran, where women and men inherit equally. With some exceptions to that, we have this convention is part of our national legal system. However, the implementation is always the problem. You know, that's going to be one of the challenges for this next parliament, to come to protect these conventions and not allow them to be, you know, cancelled, God forbid, or to allow laws that would pass that would contravene with, you know, principles in these agreements and conventions.
But given how hot this issue is, the issue of the violence against women, the levels of unacceptable levels of violence against women in Egypt at the moment, not just in Egypt, but we're dealing with it at the moment. Given that, given how hot this topic is, what has President Morsi said about it? What announcements have come out of the government? What condemnation of this?
Unfortunately, very, very little, you know, has come out on this issue, or no action. I mean, I would, one thing that could have come out is, you know, okay, you know, these incidents of mass sexual harassment happening in Tahrir, it's known the places where they are. First of all, provide better lighting in these areas. There are cameras in Tahrir Square, we know, from during the 18 days that took, you know, footage of everything. So you can get, and those cameras were replaced, you know, some of them were, but they've been replaced. You can get the footage from those and identify the people if you want to. And you can have special forces, police forces, you know, anti-harassment forces on the streets where, you know, women can quickly go to them instead of having to go to a police station and make a report and so on. There's a lot of practical steps that can be taken, you know, and nothing has happened, unfortunately. And I think it's going to be the role of the grassroots groups, the women's groups, the political parties that adopt this, to really push and pressure for this, you know, epidemic to stop.
And we're not seeing arrests and prosecutions of the guys who are doing this? I mean, and that doesn't tell us more?
We have within the criminal law, there are, you know, articles in the law that allow you to file, you know, claims for sexual harassment. The word sexual harassment is not used in those laws, but it's kind of, you know, any person who kind of assaults, you know, a woman or so on. There are articles in the law that deal with that. And before the revolution, there was actually a very famous case of a young woman who was walking in the street in broad daylight with a friend of hers, and this like truck driver, I think it was a traffic jam or something, and he just stuck his hand out and touched her breasts. And this girl was extremely brave and lucky because of the traffic jam, and she stopped the car and ran after him, and, you know, people gathered, and she insisted to take him to the police station, and you know, people were telling her, come on, let him go, you know, he'll apologize, and she wouldn't give up, and she was, you know, alone. By the time she got to the police station, you know, her family had come and so on, and this guy was, you know, put in jail, and a case was filed, and he went to court, and he got, I think, 3 years sentence and a fine, you know. So this is a great example of, you know, women taking matters into their own hands.
How common is that?
Very, very difficult, because sometimes the perpetuator does the act and runs away, and it's very hard for you to catch them. So I think what we need is, you know, obviously more awareness, and having, hopefully, the police force being more cooperative. They are not really till now. And if you have a couple of these cases that are going to be like precedents, and it's very publicized. Oh, you know, sexual harassment, you're going to get 3 years in jail. You know, if this happens, like if we have a couple more of these and people get caught doing them, then you're going to have, hopefully, it's going to get less, or people will be scared to do that. And there has to be a public shaming. I think public shaming sometimes works better than, you know, even though I'm a lawyer and you know, I believe in the legal system, but sometimes just public shaming of certain acts works better.
Let's look at women's efforts in Tahrir to deal with the threats they're facing now. We're seeing some extraordinary groups setting themselves up. The Operation Anti-Sexual Harassment, the Tahrir Bodyguards, a little bit more traditional, if you like. But some women going there armed with a can of mace in one hand and a taser in the other. I mean, this is extraordinary.
And pepper spray. I mean, and local like innovations for pepper spray and things to use, you know. And there's another group called Egypt's Women Are a Red Line, Don't Cross, something like that. There's lots of groups, and I think that's great. That's great. And these groups have women and men participating in them, so they're not, you know, women-based only or men-based. So it's you see.
But is meeting violence with violence the answer?
But I mean, they don't. These groups do not like beat up people, and they do not. That's not the aim. The aim is to, if there's a sexual harassment incident that's reported, you know, a lot of them have hotlines and so on. People go, you know, they try to accost the harasser. If they're able to catch him, they take him to the police station, and, you know, they go through the process in some cases. In other cases, the person runs away, but they're able to at least help the victim. You know, sometimes her clothes are ripped off, so they have extra clothes with them. Do some counseling, report it, document it, that kind of stuff, you know. But the aim is not to really be violent. You know, that's never been part, you know, our revolution has been a peaceful revolution, and all those groups and other groups maintain that, you know, this concept of being a peaceful movement, despite the fact that, you know, we've faced a lot of violence in the last 2 years, especially since, you know, the last 3-4 months have been quite violent.
There's some interesting research coming out also about what protects you and what doesn't, because you know, some men will claim, well, we would never harass someone who was modestly dressed, the blame the victim kind of argument, which incidentally, I must ask you, is blaming the victim in Egyptian culture acceptable?
I think it's an international culture of blaming the victim, whether it's in Egypt, in India, United States. I mean, United States, one of the most liberal democracies, and the statistics on a rape per minute or per second are crazy. You know, so I don't think it has anything to do with how the woman is dressed or so on. I think our society maybe uses that as an excuse, but there really is no excuse, you know. And in many incidents we've had, even before the revolution, you know, at the times of like the, you know, national holidays like the Eid, the big feasts and so on, when downtown and other areas are pretty crowded and stuff, you had incidents like that. And there are a lot of girls who are veiled, who are wearing the niqab, who are wearing abaya, yani they had wearing loose clothes, and they would still get harassed. So I do not, you know, agree to that idea, and I think that our people in our society have spoken out against that that's not an excuse at all, you know. And it could be your mother, it could be your sister, it could be your wife who gets, you know, harassed. So you should not be using that argument in the first place.
You've broadened it, and broadened it wisely, because it's not just an Egyptian problem. We've had the terrible rapes in India. Yes. We've had the gang rape in South Africa that attracted so much terrible publicity. We've had Republican Party politicians in the United States make some extraordinary statements about rape. Even the much criticized Oscars performance that so many women found so offensive when they sang a song about women's breasts. So there's a problem. Is it an awareness problem now? Do we see the attention on the events in Tahrir in part because we're seeing women say enough? Or is it that actually right across the world, violence, aggression, abuse, disrespect of women is actually getting worse?
I think it's part of it's getting worse, but I think it's also the fact that, you know, the media has become so developed now. So we hear more about these cases. People are able to document them more. I mean, this violence against women has always happened, and it's not something new. I think it's just becoming the forefront of, international media and news, maybe in attempts to link events or so on. I think, a big reason or part of it, maybe in the case of Egypt, because it's related to revolution, it's different, but in India and other places, it could be related to poverty, people feeling that they are, so desperate in their lives and angry and frustrated and so on. And so women, as the weaker, sex in most of these societies, are just used to kind of venge out, and use violence against. Of course, that's not an excuse at all, but maybe it could be an analysis of what happens. I'm not into psychoanalysis to know, but I think this mass craziness of violence against women is also result of all these patriarchal societies that still see women as objects rather than human beings who have emotions and feelings and so on, and
an intellect and
yes,
an opinion.
And the media has a very important role, and sometimes the stereotypes of women in media across the world, I mean, it's not just Western media, it's all over the world, the images that are perpetuated help to create this kind of stereotype, unfortunately.
But in Egypt, you still, as you said, have a very patriarchal society.
Yes.
The Tahrir problems were worse on the second anniversary than they were on the first. So how much more serious is this probably going to get? This is an imponderable, I know, but is Egypt beginning to get to grips with it? Or are you seeing enough attention being paid to it, or are people just saying in sufficient numbers to ignore it? Well, segregate Tahrir, make the women protest on one side and the men on the other, or don't go there at all, or...
No, I mean, I think that it's gotten a lot of attention. Local media attention has been focused on the issues, and many of the groups, the anti-harassment groups, have been hosted on a lot of the TV shows and so on. So there's a rising awareness. We have very active, Egyptians are very active on social media, Twitter, Facebook, and so on. And there's been so many groups that have been established, local, even community groups, to fight this. So I don't think it's gonna get worse. It's gonna continue, but the fact that there are groups that will fight it and so on, and hopefully, whatever parliament comes in, God knows, there will be attempts to have, because there has been a draft law on sexual harassment and dealing with violence against women that's been submitted by activist groups, women's rights, feminist groups from before the revolution, and it keeps getting tabled, put in the drawer, and so on. And hopefully some legislation will pass, or there will be pushes for that, at least lobbying for that, I hope.
Thank you, Ragia Omran, for talking to Al Jazeera.
Thank you.